So in this video, I'm going to try my absolute hardest to be somewhat efficient in explaining why the Polaroid One-Step Plus is probably one of my favorite cameras. For starters, everyone knows that traditional classic Polaroid frame with the massive square of a print. While I'm under the assumption that you do know that there's multiple models of Polaroid cameras, old or more modern, I do think that the more modern lineup has more differences than in the past. So in this video, I am going to try to compare the Polaroid One-Step Plus, the Polaroid One-Step 2, and the Polaroid Now, which I believe is Polaroid's most recent model. First things first, I want to cover availability. This camera is currently sold out on the official Polaroid website, I believe, and I'm under the assumption that they're doing this because they want to push out their Polaroid Now model. Needless to say, I'll be leaving links in the description of the video, along with some extras that I'll be talking about during the video. Yes, for the record, the camera is available in that link. A bit of a backstory on this camera. The first edition of the Polaroid One-Step was released in 1977 by a legend of the name Edwin Land, a man on a mission to make instant analog photography seemingly accessible to everyone and anyone, which is pretty cool. According to the official Polaroid website, this camera gives you all the creative freedom you want in a nifty 70s design, and I can vouch for that. Although it is made out of plastic top to bottom, even the lens, I can't deny that I really do like the way the camera looks and the way it feels in the hand. I'm lying, it feels really bad in the hand, but it looks great and it produces relatively great results. One feature that sets it apart from its more inexpensive counterparts, such as the One-Step 2 and the One-Step Now, the One-Step Plus allows you to connect your camera to your phone through Bluetooth, allowing you to manually access some things that would otherwise not be entirely possible. With that being said, you do have a manual mode in which you can actually change some settings, albeit nothing super advanced. You can play with your exposure time, your aperture, alongside a flash on and flash off setting and an eject setting. I'm going to try out that eject setting because I haven't yet, but I'm under the assumption that you can do something more than a double exposure, something such as a triple exposure. So really informal of me, but this channel is anything but formal. But I want to mention that I did try out doing a triple exposure, which you can, but I completely forgot to take into account that I'm exposing a sheet of film 3 times, and what I got was a completely overexposed frame. So I guess what I'm trying to say is keep in mind that you are exposing the same sheet 3 times, 4 times, you know, whatever the amount of times you're exposing the sheet to. So in theory, you have to underexpose everything you're shooting. Maybe, I think. I'm gonna try it again. Okay, so it did work. It also didn't work. I'm just trying to figure this out. This is like the first time I actually ever used the multiple exposure setting. So that being said, yeah, you do need to practice with your exposure time and your aperture, I'm assuming, because it's still really overexposed, but I'm getting closer to having a triple exposure. Point is, I do think that's a really cool feature if you manage to figure it out. I'm not down with wasting more of my film. Just know that you can and it's there, but you do have to practice and you do have to somewhat fine-tune your exposure to get a good exposure. Now, manual mode is cool and all, but not everyone has the time nor the patience to be adjusting every individual setting alongside trying to pay attention to your drunk friends at the party. So we also have a remote, we have a self-timer, which is super cool, I guess, a double exposure setting, a light painting mode, a noise trigger mode, because everyone yells right before taking a picture, right? And my favorite thing of all, the portrait mode, which goes on to explaining as to why this camera is easily one of my favorite cameras. This camera also has 2 lenses, which can also be the worst feature on this camera, at least considering if you're like me and you forget to change the lenses. Besides human error, this camera, again, does have 2 lenses, a portrait lens and a normal lens, a standard lens. The portrait lens just gives you a somewhat increased amount of bokeh, which is cool, I guess, for a Polaroid camera. Both of these lenses are adjusted with a little slider thing on top, which in comparison to the Polaroid One-Step Now, which also has 2 lenses, the One-Step Now is actually autofocus, so the computer inside the camera predetermines which lens to use, which essentially eliminates that human error. While the One-Step Now is autofocus, it does lose out on all of the manual compatibility or all the manual configuration you can do on it. It's completely up to you if the autofocus is worth losing out on all the manual stuff. Just know that I think it is, unless you're some sort of nerd that wants to manually adjust your shutter speed every single shot. Back to the portrait lens though, I did mention that there is a portrait mode in the app. The reason behind such a mode on the app is because the camera actually has a built-in sensor that can tell you if you're too far or too close to be actually focused with the portrait lens. I guess this really helps out if you're trying to do a self-portrait with the portrait lens. Other than that, I think it has a pretty wide range as to what would be in focus with the portrait lens, more specifically 1 to 3 feet. Everything's listed in the bottom. Lastly, or maybe not lastly, another feature of this camera is that it takes both I-type and 600 film, which is pretty convenient if you want to use some older films such as duochrome. Although this isn't old, this was recently released on the Polaroid website. You could or could not find benefit using 600 film. The whole purpose behind I-type film is that it removes the battery that's built into the cartridge, making I-type film the way to go, in my opinion. All that to say that the OneStep Plus can take both, again, I-type and 600 film. Just to throw this in, the OneStep now can only take I-type film. You charge this camera through a micro USB. The battery lasts a generally long time. I've had it this whole year and I've only really charged it 3 full times. And you'll only really need to charge it when it's dead, which again, isn't often. You might be wondering if this camera actually has any cons because I haven't mentioned anything negative about this camera, and for a good reason. Every single con that I'm about to mention comes from other people's experiences, not necessarily mine, because I really don't care for them. So I'm gonna speed run through them and read them off my computer. First things first, this camera is a big piece of plastic, which I did mention in the beginning of the video, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, take it how you will. This camera is one big piece of plastic, from the flash to the lens to the viewfinder. Everything's just plastic. There's nothing, I guess, durable about this or necessarily fancy. It's just plastic. The rollers need to be cleaned frequently. Polaroid recommends every 5 packs or something like that, but I do find myself cleaning my rollers every 2 packs or so. I'm not entirely sure why, but sometimes I do get streaks on my frames. One thing that I do know is that the older Polaroid models did not have this issue before. The issue being where you had to consistently and constantly be cleaning your rollers. But whatever, moving on. And I think this is the last con. The OneStep Polaroid Plus. And I think this is the last con. The Polaroid OneStep Plus cost like $140, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I'll put up a screenshot somewhere here as to what the actual price is, but I got it for $130. Also, every pack of film is worth like $16, $17, which is pretty expensive in my opinion. This means you're paying about $2 a shot, so again, it's completely up to you if this is worth it or not. With that being said, please let me know down in the comments if I missed anything, if you have some sort of con, if you have some sort of positive that you find with this camera. Again, I'm not a massive nerd and I don't use this camera every single day, but I do know and I do want to say that I really do enjoy the camera from the amount of time that I've had it and the amount of time that I've used it. You can compare this to an Instax Mini. I have one as well, and I can tell you the differences, positives and negatives. But I feel that those cameras are just two separate beings and you can't really compare them to one another. So I'm not even going to mention the Instax in this video. One thing that I can compare the Polaroid OneStep Plus to the Polaroid OneStep Now is that, again, just to close this video off, the Polaroid OneStep Plus costs $140 right now on Amazon, and the Polaroid OneStep Now costs $100. So you do have that $40 difference, although, again, it's completely up to you if those manual features are worth it or not. That's all I have to say about the camera, really. It's a little pricey, but I guess you are paying for that premium, the premium being that it is branded Polaroid, and you do get this big, classic, traditional Polaroid print. This is completely up to you if it's worth it or not. Please don't listen to me. Again, I'll have links to everything that I mentioned in the video, along with other films that I've used in the past, down in the description. I hope this video was somewhat useful, or at least not entirely useless. Consider subscribing if I don't completely annoy you. Like the video if you like the video. I'll make more videos on this camera in the coming weeks or the coming months just because, well, I like it. It's a good change of pace when it comes to taking photos. I don't think I'm missing anything. So, yeah, that's it. Bye.